Welcome to our panel, Strength and Diversity, Leadership Insights from Working in Small Startups and Large Organizations. I do want to say this event is sponsored by the Alpenwork Center of Responsible Business and the St. Mary's College chapter of Net Impact. I also want to do a shout out for the Guyette Fellows. This is a leadership program that we have at St. Mary's for students who are demonstrating leadership by being a leader of a club on campus. And we give them experiences with a variety of executives. They all get mentors, and they have helped me to promote this event. So thank you to you all as well. And I don't know if we have members of Net Impact in the house, but thank you to Net Impact and, of course, Alpenworks. Okay, so we have an amazing panel, and y'all don't want to hear me. I don't want to hear my voice as much as I want to hear the panelists tell us about themselves and, of course, answer some questions that we have. So I'm going to start with having introductions from each of the panelists. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. And then we're going to go to some questions that we came up with together, and everyone, decided which questions they'd like to answer. So you're actually going to see questions and the names of the people who volunteered to answer those questions. By the end of the pre-screened questions, everyone will have answered at least 4 or 5 questions. So if it seems like someone's answering more questions, trust me, towards the end, everyone will have pretty much balanced out. What we're going to do when we are done with those questions is we're going to open to questions from the audience. And for that, we have Q&A. The chat is not where you should post questions, but if you have a question for the panel, either a question for all the panelists or a specific question for a specific panel member, just post it in the Q&A. And as long as we have time after we've gone through the pre-screened questions, we'll be really happy to take questions from the audience. We may not get to all of them. Please don't take that personally, but we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. So hopefully that works for everyone. I'm looking at the chat to get a sense. So we've got a lot of students, not all students, and then some people who haven't let us know. The chat is going to be disabled now, just so we can make sure people know where to put their questions. And without further ado, we have, I guess I'll say a little bit about how I know each person. Gwen and I met, I think in 2008 at an event at UC Berkeley. She guest spoke in one of my classes, and I'm really glad to have her as well. Anita was actually a delightful recruit from GEAM, who's one of our panelists. He said, oh, I think Anita would be great for this panel. So I'm really excited to have Anita, who's, I guess, new to my network. Rodrigo is a former student from another university, and it's really exciting. He was impressive then. He's even more accomplished now. Christine is also a former student, and she's actually teaching. Actually, Rodrigo and Christine are both teaching at a variety of places. Christine actually was teaching right before this. Rodrigo, I know you've done some teaching. And then last but not least, Jeem, who's a full-time faculty member at St. Mary's College. But all of these people have experience from large companies and small companies, and just doing really great things from a variety of areas, including marketing, volunteerism, and corporate social responsibility, and UX design. So enough of hearing my voice. What I'd like to do now is let each of you introduce yourselves in the order of the slides. So Gwen, you are first, and we'd love to hear you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And I'm glad that you're joining at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night. As was mentioned, my name is Gwyneth Borden. I'm the founder and CEO of Mint, which is a fintech startup. My career, I started on Capitol Hill. I've worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sector. I worked for large organizations and small organizations and everything in between. I think what's unified my entire career is that it's really always been at the intersection of where business interests meet societal interests. And that's what's always excited me and what I've worked on. And so you can build a very exciting career working in government, leading a trade association, working in a startup or starting your own startup. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you all about it.
And she also was in charge of corporate citizenship at IBM, and she came and talked to my class about that a few years ago. So that's great. Thank you so much, Gwen. And next person who's going to tell us about herself is Anita.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, great to be here. Welcome, everyone. Anita Pandey. I have about 20 years of experience, both in marketing and business development, specializing in new categories. Both at big companies like Cisco, big public companies, as well as all stages of startups that are challengers to big companies. I must say that has been interesting on being on both sides of it, of the equation. And I'm a chief marketing officer right now at Krister.ai. It's obviously an AI company. And in addition to the full-time Chief Marketing Officer roles, I also have a variety of board and advisory seats at companies around discrimination, anti-discrimination and bias in the responsible AI and model fairness space, as well as cybersecurity. And for fun, I love mentoring leaders and first-time founders. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And our next person who's going to tell us about himself is Rodrigo.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I've been in marketing and branding and brand positioning for 20 plus years at marketing agencies. I've worked globally as well as domestically with brands like Coca-Cola, Salesforce, Cisco, Google, Jeep, and Toyota. Was raised in Latin America and Peru, went to school here in the US, had a very bicultural upbringing. And I've worked with startups as well and had a startup. So eager to talk about this topic today. I find it very, very important and crucial. And I've worked on DEI initiatives for quite some time now. So looking forward to learning and participating. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And we have really an international group here. I think most of the panel was born outside of the United States, including the moderator. So what an exciting group we have in so many ways. Okay. Oops, sorry. I did not mean to skip you, Christine.
No
Christine,
worries.
tell us about yourself. Thank you.
Yes, very similar to Rodrigo's. I also spent a lot of my time overseas and in US as well. But I started my career at IBM. And basically, I started off as a graphic designer, slowly learned the UX trade, user experience trade, worked for Amazon for a little bit in Seattle. The weather was not the greatest, so I ended up moving over to Hong Kong for a little bit. And I managed team all over Asia, really got a chance to learn the cultural diversity, especially on how they handle requests. So there's a lot of really amazing things that I learned from overseas, which are very, very different from the way that we operate in the US. And then afterwards, I started working at Dell EMC, managing the portfolio for a lot of enterprise design. And then at my last job, I was a senior director at a Fortune 500 company, handling pretty much was the head of design for the entire company. And now that I've put the corporate life behind me, I'm really focused on educating the next generation of designers and design leaders. So I currently work as an adjunct faculty at a design school called MICA, Maryland Institute College of Arts.
How wonderful. Thank you so much. And last but not least, my colleague at St. Mary's, Jeem, who's also a former student. I have 3 former students on the panel, which is pretty great. So Jeem, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so as Michelle mentioned, I teach at St. Mary's in the business school. I teach entrepreneurship, strategy, and managing and leading organizations. Like a lot of folks on the panel, I started my career in large companies as well, in marketing for me at companies like Del Monte and General Mills, Heinz. After that, I spent about 8 years running my own company, although I've been involved in a number of startups. Entrepreneurship is my passion, hence why I teach it now. I also do some mentoring with startups and with small businesses here in the community. My consulting practice, which I currently do while I teach as well, work with small business owners to kind of help them develop plans to grow and just manage the issues that come up as you grow a business. So excited to be here and talk about this exciting topic.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just so grateful that you have such diverse experiences in large organizations and small organizations. So we've got diversity of a million different kinds of diversity, and it's just absolutely wonderful. What an impressive group. Okay, before I go on to questions, I do need to say this is being recorded. I think everyone probably agreed to be recorded. Those of you who are in the audience, you're automatically muted. Your cameras are off, so you don't have to worry, oh my gosh, does my hair look okay? You're also automatically muted for the entire webinar. And the reason for that is because sometimes people accidentally turn on their microphone and then there's noise in the background and unintentionally that ends up interrupting the speakers. So that is why you're muted. That is the nature of webinars. So anyway, I'm going to start with the questions that are pre-prepared. And then remember, for those of you who are in the audience, this is your chance. You can start putting questions in Q&A and hopefully we'll have time to get to some of them or even better, all of them. Okay, and then here's the first question, and I'm gonna make it so that I can actually read it. What advice do you have for sharpening your leadership skills, both as a student and early in one's career? Because that's the majority of the people in our audience. And then also, does this advice differ for people of color or minority groups? So we're going to start with Anita. She's going to tell us her answer, and then we'll go to Jean and Christine. Anita, take it away.
Great. Yeah. So I think, one of the hallmarks of really being a great leader is providing clarity and support. And so just being really intentional about finding both formal and informal mentors who can help you build that skill set, I think is really key. And in terms of how that advice might differ for people of color, I think at the end of the day, relatability is really important, especially when it comes to trust as a leader. So just being very self-aware as well as audience aware and trying to sort of looking at that gap on relatability and finding common ground between yourself and your audience. I think that's really table stakes to earning trust. So I'd argue that if you're a person of color delivering a message, for instance, to an audience where that gap is big on relatability, you do need to work harder to understand that gap and while still maintaining that authenticity of voice. And then last, I would say that as a person of color, if you develop that muscle really well, that can actually become your greatest strength, surpassing even people who actually take that common ground for granted.
Yeah, how wonderful. What a great answer. Thank you so much for that. Jean, what do you have to share on that question?
Yeah, so I think this applies to not just leadership, but just in general. What I've often told people is one of the things I think you want to, of course, find a good mentor. That's super helpful. Just to reinforce what Anita said. And one of the things I also say is it's important to practice early and as you move through your career, being your own advocate. Like, make sure that, for example, as you get a sense for what leadership experiences you need, because I really think you'll learn to be a great leader through experiences, right? That develop that leadership muscle and give you practice leading and managing. You want to seek out those opportunities and advocate for yourself to get them. So make sure your bosses know, make sure your mentors know, make sure people know what it is you want to do next and what experiences you want to get, so that they have you in mind as opportunities come up, right? They're talking amongst their senior colleagues about opportunities as they come up, and you want to be the person that they think about to advocate for or to recommend. Those opportunities, they just aren't going to come to you. Someone's not just going to bring them to you and say, hey, do you, they might, but you're far more likely to get them if you advocate for yourself and if you make sure your wishes and your plans are known. Because I really do think it's about developing a series or a number of experiences as you move through your career that develop the skill set for you to become a better leader, better manager, and better at whatever it is that you want to excel at in your field. So I think that's just something if you're shy, if you think maybe it would be too demanding or too for whatever reason, if you give yourself reasons why you don't want to say what you want ahead of time, just know that you're limiting the opportunities, and somebody else is going to get them because they're going to have their hand up.
Right. Now, and I'll just do a side note. Jean, you told me that you were interested in teaching and potentially teaching full time. And I'm not the only one. There were several faculty who said, oh, we should get this guy. He's really good. Trust me. If we hire him, it's going to be great. So I actually can say Jean is not just talking the talk. He's walked the walk. And now we have him as a full-time faculty member. So it paid off both, I guess, for Jean and for the entire college. Thank you so much for that. Christine, we'd love to hear from you on this question as well.
Yeah, I can't stress enough on what Jean was talking about, just advocating for yourself and really being a good communicator, because and being self-aware as well, just knowing what you want and talking to people about it, having the network around you so that when those opportunities come up, you're not just advocating for yourself, but everyone around you will be advocating for you. And another thing that I think is really important, at least for me, throughout my career that has helped me is just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid when an opportunity comes up. Try it. If it doesn't work out, it's okay. But if it does work out, it could really, really help you in your career. So be flexible, don't be scared, and be a good communicator.
Oh, that's great advice. And I would say if you are one of those people who's scared, because I often get scared, just do it anyway. And the more you do the things you're afraid of, the less you become afraid, right? I can tell you the first time I had to give a presentation to an audience, I lost my voice. I mean, I didn't like lose my voice, cough, cough. I just blanked and thought, okay, I'm never doing that again. And someone said, why don't you try again? And now it's something I actually love to do. I'm not necessarily good at it, but I'm not afraid of it anymore because I kept going. And whatever it is, just keep going. So thank you so much for that. Sorry for adding my own little. Okay, great. We have another question. What are some of the unique challenges and benefits that you've experienced working in small companies? And all of you have worked in small and large companies, but we're going to hear from Gwen, Anita, and Jeem on this particular question.
Yeah, I think the advantage of small companies is that there's a lot of work, and you can insinuate yourself into lots of different areas that you wouldn't necessarily get to in a big company. You also usually are closer to who's making decisions and control. And so if you want to try something new or different, it's not such the bureaucracy that there is in larger organizations. I mean, bureaucracy doesn't unfortunately just apply to a government. It actually applies to any organization that gets over a certain size. And so I really recommend working for small companies because you do get a lot of experience. You could try different things. You could pilot things. You also probably learn a little more about different aspects of the business because you have such exposure. There's usually only a few people doing each different role. And so it's a great way to kind of, if you're not sure what you want to be doing, spend some time and get to know your colleagues or help colleagues out in different areas so that you can figure out if there are other practices that you'd like to pursue yourself. Maybe you're not a marketer, but you'd like to learn about marketing. Or maybe you want to be a CEO someday. And so the CEO of the company will let you kind of shadow them or do some special projects for them. So that's, I think, really the best benefit of working in a small company.
Oh, great. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. Next, we're going back to Anita and then Jeem.
Yeah, I've got a +1 that on what Gwyneth said is that you actually you come closer to learning how to build a business, to really run a business, and how what you do really impacts the business, so that just there's less layers involved. So you don't have this siloed little piece of the business. You actually understand how you move the needle, and that becomes really palpable. So I think, Gwyneth just nailed that. I think it also helps you learn something that is one of the biggest advantages of a company, which is it helps you appreciate, good or bad, how hard it is to build a culture of success and execution. And so, around some of those things, you're going to see some of the difficulty in building a good culture and some of the benefits of, building that. And so it's going to make you more intentional about every other company you join and looking for the hallmarks of a good culture. So for instance, small companies, they often thrive on people who take a lot of initiative. They thrive on people who take a lot of ownership and who act with speed to outpace big companies. And those same personality traits that you can learn from and that are advantageous when an employee base is small, well, those can become disadvantageous or challenging when the company employee base gets larger and there's no clear swim lanes of ownership or people operate in a silo. And so I think flipping that into a positive benefit, or watching the navigation of that positive benefit, will really actually help you build or look for that in bigger companies as well, or appreciate how to scale a company and really run a business.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that. That's great. I'm learning so much. This is awesome for me. Okay, Jeem, you are our next person to answer this question. Take it away.
Yeah, hey, so my perspective is going to be from a big company to entrepreneur, because my small company experience was really running my own business. And I guess my observation, and this might be different for different industries, but coming from large Fortune 500 marketing, consumer products companies, they invest a lot, and I'd imagine more so than smaller companies on training, development. There's just a very robust structure around bringing people in from school and getting them up through different levels and skill sets and so it's a huge it's a great experience for someone young and who wants to kind of learn an industry. And so one of the things that I realized when I left and then had my own company was that I had to be a lot more intentional about finding opportunities to stay on the front of, the front edge of my industry and to continue to grow and develop. Because what can happen when you leave a large company, you leave the environment where a lot of that, the experts in different fields are being brought in to speak at, summits and training sessions and so on. And then you leave that to a smaller company that does a lot less of that. Is that you can, I think, if you're not intentional about making sure that you're growing, you're going to conferences, you're, networking and connecting with people that are experts in their fields, and you're continuing to grow in the industry, is that you can somewhat stagnate, right? So I think that's sort of the one of the challenges of working in smaller companies is if you want to continue to grow and be at the front of your industry, I think you just need to be a little bit more intentional about how you do that, and not just you don't have the mix of activities and events and things planned out for you or coming to you where you are because the company has all the resources to do that. So
Yeah,
just
that's a
something
great,
to think
that's,
about.
yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, one thing I would say, and I hate to say silver lining to COVID, because COVID was such a terrible thing for all of us in so many ways. But because of it, of course, here we are on Zoom, right? And there's so many events that are so much easier and they're free. Like there's so much content now that's available that we can attend live, like this event, to sort of stay at the cutting edge. And they're free or cheap. And they're certainly, even if there's a registration fee, you're not getting on a plane, getting a hotel, needing to leave your home and all that. So I think it's become, would you agree it's become easier than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago to stay at the top, to stay networked and kind of informed?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
so
a
that's
lot of
kind of,
events, sorry, and a lot of events now, there's hybrid, right? That they always try to
yeah,
accommodate people that are zooming in. But I just think that the main thing is, just it used to happen because you go to work and there's always stuff coming onto your calendar. You're being invited to things. There's annual summits. There's things that are just set up by the organization because of the resource pool. But as you move to smaller companies, I suspect they have less resources for that. You probably are expected to hit the ground running with a better developed skill set, or you're doing very narrow tasks. So you just have to be a lot more proactive and deliberate about continuing a career trajectory and career plan and so on.
that's great. These have been such great answers. Thank you to everyone. Okay, now we have another question. What are some of the unique challenges and benefits that you've experienced working in large organizations? So we started with small. Now we're going to talk about the benefits and challenges for large organizations. And for any of these questions, if your answer would differ, if you're a member of a minority group or people of color, then let us know. Jean, you get to go. I guess we're hearing from you twice in a row.
Yeah,
Well, actually, would you mind if I let Rodrigo go just so that we'll be, that's my
absolutely.
fault. But okay,
Absolutely.
Rodrigo, and then if Rodrigo's ready, and then we'll go back to Jean, and then we'll go back to Gwen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that, large organizations, and it's been noted, have resources, right? And they have annual plans, and they have budgeting, and they have M&A teams, and they have, in some cases, global footprints. So there's a lot of resources there. There's people that you can look to. You can find mentors within large organizations. They have paths that you can chart your career path on if that's something that you'd like to do. So there's a number of benefits in that way. The another benefit is you're able to, they'll do training, or they used to do training, and bring, have a recruiting team that goes to colleges, brings people in, etc. Right. The not so great benefits is with all of that structure comes bureaucracy, and it and methods and processes. And if you're an ambitious person, sometimes that can be a challenge because you don't want to wait 3 years for your next promotion, or you don't want to wait 5 years to get to the next place you want to go to, or you don't see why, as someone out of college, you can't go work in London, and they're giving those positions to other people that are more senior, et cetera, right? So those can be frustrating for at times the more entrepreneurial, ambitious leaning folks. It's a balance, right? Everything has their pros and not so positive elements, right? So I do think that coming out of a 4-year college, a bachelor degree, an IBM or a Microsoft or an established brand or Coca-Cola, established brands, at least they used to, I don't know anymore, but established brands, it was good to get 3-4 years under your belt at an established organization, Procter and Gamble, et cetera, right? We used to, back, this is a long time ago, 20 years ago, anyone that came out of, say, out of Xerox, this is dating me for sure, but Xerox had a phenomenal sales training program, right? And so it's like, if you sold for Xerox and you could sell copy machines, right? That, HP was another one locally here in the Valley, right? HP was really good. You didn't want to stay a long time at HP, but if you did your 3-4 years at HP, that was a good stamp of approval. And there are marketing agencies like that as well, Foot Cone and Belding used to be one of those. I mean, there's the Touche, I mean, there's et cetera. So I think there's that. I don't know how relevant that continues to be, but it certainly was when I was coming into my career. So yeah, I think those are some of, I've worked in both, small and large, and it's really where you are in your career, where you are, what phase of life you're in. I mean, I think that, I've worked at organizations where people, expected you to check your email on Saturdays and Sundays over the weekends. And I've worked in organizations when nobody checked their email on the weekends. And I will say that at different phases of my life, when I had young kids, we didn't have kids, those cultures fit different times better than other times. And I think that's something to be aware of and conscious of, whether you're working at a large company or a small company or a startup, or where you're at. Does that match your life phase? Is probably something I would suggest.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we're sort of hearing it from other people as well, that the stage of your life and the stage of your career could determine what's a better fit for you. And the strengths and weaknesses should be taken into account, as well as the culture. So thanks so much for that. All right, Gwen, please share with us your answer to this question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, that very similar. I mean, I worked at IBM, and I was working at the Chamber of Commerce, small organization. My CEO had spent 36 years at AT&T, the Pacific Bells, all those different things, and really thought it was important to have big company experience. And I will say that it was great. I think a few things. I think it's advantageous to do it early in your career because there are so many rules and structures. I mean, big companies have rules and policies and procedures for everything you could ever imagine. And while it's super annoying when you've worked in an environment that didn't have those, it's a lot harder going to a big company where they have literally a rule for anything you could ever think of. But also big companies do have great recruitment program, great training programs. I mean, I got to travel globally, be on global teams, do really dynamic things that I would not have been able to do in another sort of organization. And even though I worked in a big organization, I still had, like, locally, like, was the spokesperson for the company of IBM, like in the Bay Area and in areas in the Western United States. So there are some real advantages because they do have all these different teams and distribute work in such an interesting sort of way. So big companies are really great for that. I mean, we had the largest, like, online university. If you wanted to take classes, there were a million different classes. Part of that, I did this leadership development program for marketing, communications, and citizenship professionals. And, like, it was done at Duke Corporate Education. And so there's lots of different things like that you get working at a big organization. And I think that it's really advantageous to get that early in your career, or when you want more work-life balance, because I do find that big companies, unless you're a senior leadership, do allow for you to have better work-life balance. They have great health care. They have great, like we had, like, adoption care, health care, all kinds of different programs and benefits that you need. And so big companies are really awesome, like when you're planning to have a family, or if you're that period in your life when you want it to be a little more settled and you have those sort of benefits. So, I mean, I think that, large organizations can have, some really great benefits. I will say there is a lot of bureaucracy. There is a lot of duplication of services. There's a lot of fiefdom. There's not always knowing why things don't, like, why these two things don't work together. So there are complications and bureaucracy, of course. But I think if you set out to kind of maximize, that benefit of value of being part of a larger network of a big company, it's very advantageous. The other thing I will say for communities of color, there are what some people call diversity. We call them diversity network groups, or ERGs, I think they're called in other organizations. There are groups for LGBTQIA, for Asian, for Black, for women. And so you do have these affinity groups, and the company sort of has executives that help support those groups. And so then you have specialized programming and networking, which is also very helpful. And those companies typically have better metrics or desires around more diverse hiring and more diverse teams. And so if that is important to you, that is something that big companies, and I will say in some ways, feel like they have the luxury or the necessity to focus on. They have supplier diversity programs, they have all that kind of stuff. So for people if you're looking for a place where those values are more at the forefront, then a big company can be a great solution for that.
Oh, that's a great point. Thank you so much. Again, all great answers from all the questions so far, and I'm guessing it's going to be the same. So thanks so much for that. Super interesting points. Okay. So this kind of, to some extent, y'all hit this, but if you want to add anything, you can. For people just starting their careers, and some of you touched on this when you answered one of the two prior questions, a lot of the people in the audience today are students. I'm actually, we asked people to put that early on, but some people came in late, and I'm recognizing a lot of my former students here. So, and they're still students, they're just not in my class. So quite a few students here. So for those who are either about to start their career or very early in their careers, what advice do you have for relating to whether they should look for positions in small or large organizations? Some of you already touched on this. If you did, just add anything. And those of you who haven't yet, hit it. Okay, Christine, tell us, what do you think? Big or small if I'm early, just graduated, looking for a job?
I think it's being self-aware of your situation. What is it that you need? And I think the panel has kind of talked about, where are you in life? Are you an adult learner right now trying to get a degree and find a better job? Is there any family or family situation that you need to be aware of? Or are you a student who can relocate to a city that you've never heard of overseas and be able to strive over there as well? So I think it's being very self-aware of what you're looking for. If you're open, I think just don't be afraid. Again, going back to what I said before, don't be afraid and go try it out. But I think some of the skills that you really should think about is, I always live by the 4 C's. On my team, I always live by the 4 C's: the communication, the collaboration, the culture, and also the commitment. Like, I think if you're asking yourself, should I work for a bigger company or a smaller company, the 4 C's are the things that you should think about. How well are you on communication? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? When it comes to collaboration, do you like working with people? Do you not like working with people? The culture of the company, it could be different in a smaller company, a startup, versus a large corporation, because are you able to build that culture with your coworkers as well as you can with your coworkers in a smaller company? And then just a commitment, time commitment, relocation commitment, whatever it is that takes you away from the rest of the things that you do in life. So I think there's no straight answer, at least from my perspective. There's really no straight answer. It depends on what you're looking for, where you are in life, and the answer is different for everybody.
Yeah, no, that was a great point. I think you brought up something, which is culture, because we're talking about small and large, like all the big ones are the same, all the little ones are the same. You could have 2 large corporations with a very different culture. And you can even have 2, I mean, yeah, it's everything y'all said about startups and large corporations are generally true, but you could have 2 startups that are very different in terms of, sometimes they're toxic, and sometimes you've got a founder who really values quality of life for the employees and gets that when you invest in well-being of your employees, it actually pays off on the bottom line, aside from not being a jerk. So yeah, thanks for bringing up that culture thing. Great. Okay, so now we're moving on to Gwen. Gwen, tell us, what do you think, big or small, if I'm just starting out?
I mean, I think you make a chart, right? I think you make a chart about some of the things you want to do. Do you want to potentially live abroad or travel abroad? Do you want to get a vice president title. I mean, there's different things that different goals that you might have to do something in 5 years or 3 years. I mean, I think if you think about what those things are and then look at the kind of organization you could achieve that in, I think that would be the best thing. I mean, I think what's nice about starting in a big company is because it has so much structure and rigidity that you really that it starts you off in an interesting, good way in your kind of your work ethic and kind of like thinking about the world. And then you get out of there and actually do really fun, interesting things. I think that there's like a 10,000-foot view of business and things about business that you get in a big company. And I think it's really interesting when you go to a small company because they don't have all those different resources. And so you're trying to ultimately compete against this big company without all of those things. And it's helpful to have been on the inside to know exactly what you're competing against. But again, I do think it really is, you make a chart, you think about your goals, the things you'd like to do in the next 3 years or 5 years or however long time that you're looking at, and what kind of organization can help you do that.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're on to Anita and then Jean. Anita, take it away.
Yeah, I think, lots of really great comments. I think the resourcing thing is very real. We're also in a very high inflationary period. So, that's where the access to cash for startups does put them in difficult situations. So I would say that if you are about to graduate or you are looking at something within the next year or so, I would look at the cost of capital. The access to cash for startups, and I would ask what their burn rates are, how much cash they've raised in the bank. So taking a cold, hard look at their cash position is very important in assessing what kind of company you join, since they're not all made equal. The other thing I would look for is also, what does the brand of the company stand for? A small company, the brand may not be known for anything yet. But a larger or mid-sized company may have a brand that stands for something. That's how you build your brand. You get associated with what that brand stands for. So if it's a company that's really known as hyper growth, or like an NVIDIA, it's known for AI, right? It starts creating your brand narrative and helps you lean into what your future state might be. So think about your future state and what you want your brand narrative to be, and borrow the brand of the logo of that company if that advances your own brand, because it will help you tell the story with proof, especially when you're early in your career and you don't have those brands to back you up as much. So I think that also, along with that cold, hard look at the cash position of the company and whether it is viable and is going to be around for longer term, needs, right now, especially in an interest rate economy, should be looked at.
And can I add something to what you just actually said? I think that's if you have a desire to start your own startup company in the future, I always make a joke that there's logo soup on the team slide, but the number thing that people look for if you're starting your own startup is the experience that you have, and having had a marquee major technology company on your resume, not necessarily like the older ones, but like the newer ones that are hot right now specifically. It just actually adds and lends credibility to you when you're like less tested. So that is something to think about if your goal is to start a startup in the next 5 to 10 years. Where you worked before and people having known those companies and think and have a respect for them will make a difference.
Oh, thanks so much for saying that. We have a student in the audience that I had a 2.5-hour conversation about this because he got an offer from a big marquee company. I was thinking, but I really want to start a startup. And I'm like, no, you're graduating this year. You can do it after, and you'll be much more able to succeed if you've got this brand on your thing. I'm just going to give a side note. Many years ago, when Philip Morris was Philip Morris, they renamed themselves. I had a student who started at Philip Morris because it was the only job offer she got. Nothing against people who work in tobacco, but it's a product that kills when used as directed. And she said, it's really good pay, it's really good training. But when she decided she just couldn't take it anymore, she wrote me and she said, what do I do? How do I market myself? Because everyone thinks I'm one of those evil people who sells cigarettes. And you can just say, go look for a nonprofit, or, and say, I'm willing to take a pay cut. I want to do good in the world. And once you've done that, you've proven that you really do. And she did. And I don't know where she is now, but she did say she got a job in a nonprofit. And after that, people stopped asking her, so you like killing people, you know, whatever it is. And again, if someone works in tobacco, I'm sorry if I hit a sensitive note there. But it's such a great point that the companies are known for things. And when you've worked there, you start to seem like that. So that's such a great insight. I hadn't thought of it, but I'm going to add all your wisdom to the advice I give my students in the future. I'm learning so much for them. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Jean, last but not least, tell us what you think, big, small, how do you start out early in your career? What's your advice?
So yeah, I have a lot of great points have been raised. I would I agree with all of them. I might just focus in on one area, I guess. I would say think be honest with yourself about the type of person that you are, right? Are you the type of person that wants to have some sense of clarity about, you know, your career path, progression, your advancement? Are you the type of person that wants to learn in a structured environment, right? Like we talk about entrepreneurship being, you know, jump off out of the plane and build the parachute on the way down, or you know, stuff like that. Are you that person who wants to be in that environment where the environment itself is being created while you're joining it and trying to work in it, right? Or are you the type of person that wants to know what your responsibilities are, learn them and develop and learn your discipline or the area that you want to learn? So I think that's one of the ways that you can think about this. There's certainly, we haven't talked about this a lot much, like there's risk in working for a smaller startup company. Smaller companies are unstable, right? They don't raise the next round of funding, there might be cuts. So again, this lack of structure, all the processes, if there are any, are being made up as you know every day. Some of them don't exist. The funding is not secure always for a long time. The roles are being created and recreated and remorphed. So you have to know and deep down in your heart that that's the kind of dynamic environment that you want. You are the person who wants to live in more of a chaotic environment, right? And that's, you know, you're going to enjoy that. It's not going to be extremely uncomfortable for you, because I think there are people who can be honest with themselves and say, you know, at this stage of my career, I want to learn. School taught me some things, but now I need to learn what the industry is like. And if it's structured, I'm not the type of person that wants to take a degree program that's being created while I'm in it. Yeah, I need it to be, you know, this is my graduate school for my field. I want to learn the field of marketing or the field of design or what have you, but I don't want it to be like in a chaotic environment. I don't learn best that way, because I think that's your number one job in your first few years out of school, is to learn an industry, right? So if you're the kind of person that prefers some structure, prefers to have, you know, in a startup, there's only probably one or two roles at any given position, you know, versus a larger company where there are many possible roles. And if you find out you don't like finance that much, maybe you can switch over to the sales department. You know, there's lots of mobility. Then you probably want to look more at a more established company, at least for a few years. If you're the type of person that's like, I enjoy the chaos, the risk, the unknowns about what the future holds, but also the possibility of excitement and, you know, chest pumping and, you know, a huge win, then maybe look at a smaller company. But I do think the environment, the experience is going to be completely different. And I think it's more suited to people who are comfortable with uncertainty and without clarity about, you know, what the future holds, whether the organization might even exist in 3 or 4 years, right?
If I may add one more thing to what Jean was talking about, I think there's a lot of times students go in wanting, I want to work in big companies, or I want to work in small companies. I'm not trying to sound doom here, but it is not the best market for job seekers right now. So I would say don't be picky. Like if there is a company that's willing to interview you, go and interview, see if you get the job. If you have to apply to 100 positions just to, I mean, some of my students did, at least for UX designer job, they applied to 130 just to get 5 interviews. So it's not an easy market right now. So there's a lot of work that students need to do just to get that first round or second round. So give it a try. Don't be picky, but keep working hard. You're eventually going to find something.
Yeah, and maybe be picky when you have options and you can be picky.
Exactly.
Exactly. But that's a really great point that, yeah, and thank you for saying that. That's a really great point that If you say, okay, large only, then maybe there's a small company that would hire you that would actually be a good opportunity. So cast a wide net. I think that's a great point, especially in the current situation that we're in. That's great.
Yeah, I would add one quick thing here is that also I'm seeing an interesting, I think all of what I've heard is totally on point. I'm seeing an interesting trend where some people are actually leaving safe big companies that seem like yesterday's news and going to smaller companies that are in the AI space.
Yes,
So that's just a contrarian point of view, is that it's not all black and white. Look at where you're going, because some of those smaller companies, they will have the chaos and the uncertainty and all the things that Jean nicely outlined. But some of them actually are teaching you AI skill sets that you may not get a chance to learn at some of the bigger lumbering giants.
Oh, what a great point. And I think, we're talking about large versus small, but there's so many other aspects of a company. I talked about, do they respect work-life balance? There are big companies that do and big companies that don't. And there's, again, founders. And what you just said, the tech, what area is it in? AI is growing like crazy. And it's a great point, Anita, because having on your brand that you worked at an AI startup, even if it's not a big one, maybe it's not the open AI, but I think that's a really great point. People say, oh, he or she knows something about AI. That makes you more marketable for the next gig. So that's a great point. I'm thrilled with all these answers because I'm learning so much. And again, I think I'm going to be a better mentor of my students with these fabulous insights. So thank you so much. Okay, we're moving on to, I think I got everyone, didn't I? I hope so, who volunteered. Okay, and just so you know, I didn't pick who's answering what. They picked what they're answering. So this was not my decision. Okay, wonderful. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self who is just leaving college and entering the working world, what advice would you offer yourself? And there's another part to this question, so you can handle both or you can just take one piece of it. What would you do the same and what might you do differently? And then you can share whatever aspect of that if you want. We're going to start with Jean, then we're going to go to Christine and then Anita.
I've often said this to students I've had the opportunity to talk to as well. And I think one of the things that I did, and I suspect others do as well when they're young and just getting started in the workforce, is you had to make the perfect decision. I stressed out so much about, what type of job, what type of company, you kind of it feels like a big decision, your first job out of college, and then you don't want to mess it up. And, the reality is, looking back, there are many paths that you could take to your destination, right? And you're really not going to screw anything up in that first job. Just take the job. It doesn't even really, honestly, I think it doesn't even really matter. You could start out in sales, you could go to marketing, you could go to finance. There's going to be many changes, and you can change your career, at least over the next 5 years or 6 years. You can try different things. And frankly, it's all beneficial. You get some sales experience, you get some, technology company experience, you will get the opportunity to change things. You're not going to screw up your first job that badly. It's not that critical. It's not going to pigeonhole you. It's not going to set you back. I think I would tell my younger self not to stress out so much about it. It's not really that end of your career. It's not going to end your career or set it in stone in any particular direction. When I look at where my career went and where other people's career went that started out in different places, I can see now that there's really many paths to where we try. If you're trying to be a CEO or head of your a particular either company or area, there's many ways to get there. There isn't a one clear path. And if you don't get there the way that, is traditional, if you will, if you don't get that big, I don't know, consulting job or big five accounting, if that's your field you want to get into, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. So that's the main thing I would say. Don't stress so much about it. A career is a really long time, and there's going to be many pivots along the way. And if it turns out the first job wasn't that great, you can move on to something else and move into other industries too. You're not stuck where you pick the first time. So don't stress so hard about it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great piece of advice. I always tell students, if it's awful, you can quit and look for another job. Like this isn't it's not a wedding. It's a date. Maybe it's a long-term date, but you get to decide how long the date lasts or if it turns into long-term. So thanks so much for that. That was great. Okay, next we have Christine and then Anita.
Yeah, so my students actually bring up very similar questions, just like yours, Jean. So I teach design, user experience design, and in user experience design, we have a few arms of design, like a few disciplines. We have UX research, we have interaction design, visual design, information architecture, and you can code as well. And students always come to me like, Christine, I don't know which discipline I should go into. I think I like research, but then at the same time, I also like designing. I also like visual design and I like this. And I said, you don't really have to decide what you want to do because it's all in the same family. You just go ahead and try. Like you give it a try for a year in research. If you don't like it, ask for a stretch assignment and say, hey, can I please try out this new project where I can try my interaction skills? And if you're a strong performer, most of the time the manager will say, all right, just continue to do this job, but I'll give you a stretch assignment for you to learn new skills. And one example that I did was when I was moving on from IBM, I said, well, I think I want to move to West Coast. I think I want to work for Amazon. This job posting that I saw says that I need to learn coding. I don't know coding right now, but why don't I give it a try? So I took a few weeks, learned it, and then applied for the job, and I ended up getting it. So a lot of times you don't have to learn it on the job. You can learn it on your own too. But it's just being open to learning these new skills to get to that goal. I do think that you should have a goal, but as James said, this job might take you over here a little bit and then you realize I don't like coding after all. I'm never going to code again. And then you veer back to this side and you can go into management, you can go into design. But if at least you're progressing and eventually you reach that goal that you set yourself out for. And then the second thing that I would really suggest people do is don't underestimate the power of networking. Really get to know your peers, your colleagues, your neighbors, your family, friends. Really have them help you find, put your word out. What am I looking for? I'm really hoping to get into this field. Can I shadow you? Can I follow you and bring your kids to work day, even though I'm not your kid? Just find ways to get to know people, talk to people. A lot of people actually, I think Jamie or someone was mentioning the mentoring is really good. Finding a good mentor, they will help you along when the opportunity is there. And I've seen students where they want to get into a certain field, but they don't know anyone in that field or area. So they just blindly message people on LinkedIn and just explain the situation. And most people are willing to help, especially students, because they want to give back to the community. So don't be afraid. I would say that's the theme that I keep going. Don't be afraid. Just give it a try. It won't hurt.
Fantastic. And if you're afraid, do it anyway. That's my PS every time you say that, as someone who's often does stuff I'm terrified to do.
Yes.
I think Christine is the bravest of the two of us. Fantastic. Thank you. And now we're off to Anita. Anita, tell us about what you would say to your younger self and what you would do differently and similarly.
Yeah, I wish my younger self had been friends with Christine. You know,
We'll have
you know,
fun.
I mean, she really nailed it. It's we have to remember companies are people.
Mhm.
And so to Christine's point, I'd be really intentional about the relationships that I want to build and take a long-term view of those, because those same people are going to give you your jobs in the future, your career advice. It'll be the gift that keeps giving. It is the single biggest thing you can do for yourself is take a longer term view of the relationships you want. The companies are just, they're people. And remember that. And then I'd also, I think James said it earlier, is I'd be a lot more intentional about who I am and draw, a clearer line between the jobs I want and what my inherent passions and value system are. Because look, no job is satisfying forever, and some less than others. And most jobs are pretty demanding of our time. So rather than seek, and I can say this as an older person, but I wish I'd been intentional when I was younger, is that rather than seek satisfaction in that job alone, ask yourself, A, if the people that you're taking the journey with resonate with you, do they conform to your value system? Because you can't, those jobs are going to be temporary no matter how you treat them. As James said, you can't go wrong with the job, but you can go wrong with the people. That's
Yep.
where people actually go wrong, is with the people they choose. It's not the jobs at all. So just remember that. And I wish I had paid more attention to that. And when I think of, oh man, I really want to join a mission-driven company, et cetera, I wish I'd taken a less idealistic view of the mission-driven company and just asked myself during the interview process and otherwise, how do I take an active role in furthering my mission? And how does it align with the mission of this company? And if it doesn't, run the opposite direction.
What a great point. I'm going to actually add to what you said. I wish I'd heard from all of you when I was younger. This would have made my life so much easier, so much wisdom. So I think the students who are here and the people early in their career are particularly, I'm learning a lot, but much later in my career than I think anyone at the panel. But yeah, no, I think this is just such valuable insights, and it's just wonderful to hear all this. Okay, we've got a few more questions. And this is about diversity and inclusion, something that I think is near and dear to the heart of everyone on the panel and the moderator, which is me. What are some of the benefits that are not necessarily super obvious that you witnessed from organizations that embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion? We're going to hear from Gwen, and then we're going to hear from Rodrigo about this. So Gwen, take it away.
Well, in general, the data supports that organizations are more successful when they are diverse, right? That diverse companies with diverse teams have 2.5 times more productivity per employee, that, organizations that have women on their board, or like 30% of women on their board of Fortune 500 companies, do far better. Diverse teams make better decisions, like 66% of the time. I mean, there's a lot of data out there, and more companies know it. And I think part of the initial desire around DEI was looking at the fact that you can't serve your customer, like whoever you sell to, well, if the company's leadership and people who have input aren't representative of the world that you're selling into. And so there is this recognition that, the demographics of the world are changing. People are in regions of the world they had never had focused on for business purposes in the past. Like our country, the demographics are changing. And so what people like, the preferences and what people like and what's important has changed. I remember being at IBM and we supported the Super Bowl and things like that. And World Cup soccer wasn't even a thing. Now it's absolutely a thing. And so it's sort of like the thing is that companies realize that diversity isn't just like a nice thing to do, but it's actually quite good for business. And the biggest challenge a lot of companies have, I was just reading earlier about ChatGPT, and there's like some sort of like ChatGPT game or whatever, where you would ask a question to ChatGPT about Black culture, and of course it would get it wrong. And the whole idea that like ChatGPT can be super amazing if it has diverse people and voices feeding in input to it, right? When we talk about AI specifically, AI produces based on the information it's fed. And if it's only fed a very narrow sliver of information, the whole world is going to be at a disadvantage because it's not going to have the most inclusive answers out there. And there are going to be a lot of blind spots for actually solving real problems. So I think what's exciting is that most companies realize that. I think that the groupthink mentality sometimes is really hard. I mean, what's really interesting is that I think big companies do a far better job than smaller companies and startups, and primarily because, smaller companies, particularly startups, it's like drinking from a fire hose. You're moving really, really quickly. You don't have time to think about big programs and initiatives. You're trying to hire people quickly, put them in roles and empower them and move on. So there isn't all that training and focus. So I think specifically there's a lot of work to be done in the startup sort of world, because just the the nature of business and the way it evolves, it's not going to be the focus. If that's what you really want, then you will be disappointed with a startup unless it's been pretty established, because that's just not the forefront of their ethos, unless that startup is specifically solving a problem that that deals with diverse communities, and that's like an impact oriented kind of startup like my own, then that company will have a different orientation. But I mean, I think what's big is that, you know, the numbers bear out, the proof is in the numbers. The problem is the perception in the larger world of who makes decisions about funding and financing and leadership growth.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And now we'll turn to Rodrigo to tell us about some of the benefits that he's witnessed in organizations that embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. Rodrigo, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, you ditto to everything Gwyneth said around the data. I would say that it's also a lot more fun to work with different voices and different people in the room. And what I'm in marketing, I'm in communications, and we struggle a lot with diversity in our industry. And what's happened on a macro level is that the world has shrunk, right? The world has shrunk quite significantly, and technology has allowed that to happen. And it's commoditized information, it's commoditized content, it's commoditized entertainment, it's commoditized a lot of things that used to not be commoditized. And in that reality that we're living in, where the world has shrunk, there's a lot of different voices that need to be serviced, and a lot of different voices that have come into, quote unquote, the middle class or the consumer class. And so in my space, it's an imperative to have a diverse group of people inside a conference room making decisions around what communication programs and how we speak to different cultures and nuances, domestically as well as obviously internationally. And I have found that while organizations were very quick to embrace it 3 or 4 years ago, there's been some hesitation as of late, right? It's not, I work in the south of the U.S. quite a bit, out of Atlanta, which is a very diverse place. But the U.S. is not California, right? The U.S. is not the coast, right? There's a very different mindset that exists in the Midwest and in other places. It's not a judgment call. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. You have to be able to know those differences, never mind globally, right? And so I think that organizations, for the most part, are embracing it and understand it. The way I've come to CEOs and the C-suite when they're hesitant to is it's a business imperative, right? It's a business imperative that because I've been in rooms that don't have a diverse conglomerate, if you will, right? A diverse group of people. And when you don't have women on a board, you can tell. When you don't have women on a team, you can tell. When you don't have LGBTQ representative, because groupthink is a natural sort of element that happens in humans, right? We are geared for safety. We are geared to feel comfortable, and we just naturally feel comfortable around people that went to the same colleges that we did, live in the same cities or the same coastal towns or whatever that is, drive the same cars. I mean, some of the stuff is silly, but we are geared that way, and we have to consciously and intentionally untether ourselves from that human need, muscle memory aspect of it. And it goes back to, a lot of different things, media and whatnot, that have created these narratives inside our heads. So it's I champion the diversity on a daily basis. It's something we can't take for granted.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I think the insights have been fantastic for both of you. And I will just say, definitely more interesting when you have a diverse pool. But as someone who taught marketing communications for many years, I think we all remember catastrophic ads that, I mean, I can't believe that was a commercial, including, Pepsi. I mean, what was that, right? I mean, they had the good judgment to pull the ad and apologize, but, Black Lives Matter and protests, this is not how you sell a cola. And it was ridiculous. Like when I saw it, I thought, is this a spoof? And it wasn't the spoof. There have been many spoofs since, but if they'd had a more diverse group of people who are a little more aware, I don't think that Pepsi commercial would have ever been made. And certainly a lot of grief for Pepsi and a lot of embarrassment for the people involved. So yeah, great points made by my fabulous, diverse and brilliant panel. Next question's kind of the flip of that. Well, it's not really the flip, but it's definitely important. Have you seen how have you seen the challenges around diversity, equity, and inclusion change over the past 5 years? And it can be over the past 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, however you want to do it, for both small and large organizations. And is it different or is it the same in terms of what those challenges are? I think you've all spoken a little bit on this, but I'd like to hear from the two people who volunteered on this, Rodrigo and Christine.
Sure. I would say it was a pre-pandemic and post-pandemic are sort of like, two different worlds, right? And I think that pre-pandemic, when I was evangelizing, diversity ERPs internally at a very large agency and talking to the CEO about it, and we had people that wanted LGBTQ representation, and they were looking to me to be the executive sponsor of it, and I was agreeing to it. It was a tough sell in 2019, in 2018. It was a tough sell on both of those fronts. And post 2020, the organization put fuel behind those two initiatives, right? And I think that a lot of things changed during the pandemic and other elements that were going on during that time, and elections and political realities, et cetera. I think now the last 12 or 14 months, there seems to be some, with Elon Musk and some other things, there seems to have been some pullback on diversity programs and inclusion, and we live in very divisive times. And again, you can map this regionally, you can map it culturally, but I'm a little surprised at the recent pullback in some very well-named organizations around diversity and equity and so forth. And what I've come across and what I've worked on in regard to this particular sector, I used the word intentional before, I use it again, because what happens is you can't, and I'll talk about small, we end up going to the same place that we're comfortable. So if you went to Cornell, you recruit from Cornell. If you went to Stanford or UC Berkeley, if you grew up in the Bay Area, or you went to a Cal Poly or UC Santa Barbara, USC, like that's where you go, right? And so we have to force ourselves to go to different places to fill the pipeline with different types of people, and that we aren't necessarily seeing in our day-to-day or in the way we grew up, or et cetera, right? And it's hard to say that message without offending people. It's possible. I've done both. I've not offended and offended people, but it's difficult because people don't see themselves as blinded to some realities that exist, like the pipeline of a diverse, of hiring people from Fresno State, or hiring people from colleges that you never heard of before, right? Or something along those lines, or geographies that aren't necessarily places we would recruit from, or backgrounds, right? That are not our norm. And so I think you have to really be intentional about, and organizations have to be, and there was some fuel behind that post 2020. And I think we just have to keep pushing that's important, or we're going to see some pullback in some strides that we made.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rodrigo. Christine, now we're going to hear from you. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with Rodrigo on the pre and post pandemic, because I think pre-pandemic, people were going into the office. When you go to the coffee machine or water cooler, you're able to bond with people. Those conversations, you could just have those conversations, talk about what you're going to do this weekend, and maybe you'll end up going out for dinner together. You'll end up going, I actually saw this a lot at work. The younger generation, they talk about the weekend plans, and they invite each other out to go to the club with each other, or go to the bar with each other. But I think after the pandemic hit, that relationship or that chance, that communication line was no longer there, because everyone, I mean, people were not in the office at the same time. So I think companies became more intentional in building programs that facilitate that connection, and one of those were the diversity program. Um, how I saw during the pandemic especially was, and when the pandemic happened, I have two young kids. So basically, I had no childcare. I was in front of a computer, full-time job while taking care of two kids. And diversity to me during the pandemic was the ability that my employer was able to come up with these programs for employees with young children. They would have nannies come to your house, babysitters come to your house, and it's all paid for. Or I can send the kids to a childcare center, like all masked up and all of that. Like they gave us affordance to have to deal with the situation that was at hand. So that I thought was a pretty awesome thing that happened in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion during that time. But I think a lot's going on right now in terms of diversity. I think people are more open to it because organizations do see that when you embrace diversity, it increases the bottom line. People end up being more loyal to the company. They're working for the company because they believe in the brand, they believe in the culture, they believe in the company, and they end up working more without knowing it or realizing it. So I think companies will eventually all realize that and how important diversity is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And you kind of raised an interesting point. By the way, those of you with questions, please post them in the Q of A. We've got a couple questions already, but if you have a question and you haven't posted it yet, please post because we've only got a few questions. I think we'll have time at least for two. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I guess, Christine, you brought up that there are different kinds of diversity, right? It's accommodating, people with small children. That's a form of diversity as well. And Rodrigo brought up the LGBTQ, and there's so many forms of diversity that we need to think about. And I think the benefits of diversity, regardless of what kind of diversity it is, they apply. And of course, everything everyone is saying about, the trend, it kind of goes up and down. And we will hope that the general trend line is in the right direction because we're all big fans of the very many benefits of incorporating this. Okay, we don't have a lot of questions left, but here's an important one. We likely have, in fact, I know we do because I just looked at the names. We have many undergraduates attending today. What advice do you have for students who want to do everything they can to increase their chances of getting a job at a great company when they graduate? And this is, it might be different for my students of color because I have quite a few, I've got a diverse group of students in the audience as well. So if you want to tweak it for minority students, that's fine. But Rodrigo and Gwen, you both said you would like to answer this question. So I'm gonna flip it because Rodrigo, we just heard from you. We haven't heard from Gwen in a while. So is it okay if we do Gwen and then Rodrigo? Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. I remember you as always being a gentleman, so good to see that you still are. Okay, Gwen and then Rodrigo on this important question. What do you do to get that job if you haven't found it, you're about to graduate?
Yeah, I mean, earlier, I think, I can't remember who said it, but the network is a very important thing. And so the one thing I learned, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's absolutely all of those things. So if you have an interest in a particular company, whether it's, like I was mentioned earlier, scouring LinkedIn, asking your friends and their parents and their connections, being able to reach a real person, because the problem in today's world, when you apply just through some sort of like platform, your resume is being scanned for keywords, right? It's no actual person is seeing your resume nowadays. Unfortunately, they're put through these systems where they're looking for keywords. And so understanding what those keywords are is key, but also just having an insight, because if you know someone on the inside, then your resume will get pulled out and actually seen. If you don't have those keywords and the experience that they're looking for, you're going to really be bypassed. So that's number one. Number two, if you can get an internship or haven't thought about an internship, definitely pursue internship opportunities. They are really great ways for companies to try you out. And you can approach companies you're interested in interning with, or you can find internship opportunities because they're just a really great way to gain some skills and experience, because you do have that kind of like cyclical problem where it's like people don't like, you can't get a job because you don't have experience, but you can't get experience to be, to be employable. And so internships are really a great way to be able to do that. And even if you haven't done one yet, try to do one of those. The other thing I think that people often underestimate is nonprofit volunteerism. If you have the time and inclination, nonprofit volunteerism enables you. I mean, so many nonprofits are looking for people who are energetic and have time. And so if you go in there, and a lot of times the board of directors are people who are very well heeled, have high level positions, have a lot of money and influence. And if you can go into a nonprofit and be part of their, organization, volunteering, doing their social media or their press, or like being just a great organizer of events, you can show leadership skills that you can actually put on your resume to help show like sort of like work experience. But you can also make connections that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to make. So I definitely recommend leveraging nonprofit volunteerism as a way to help you with your work experience overall. So those are three key things I would say. But again, it's really important to like be a hustler, as they say, like find the people you want to know, find people who are connected to that person and have them make an introduction. At the end of the day, so many people will even if you say, listen, I want to learn about what you do, people love stroking their ego. If you reach out to someone and say, I'm so impressed by what you do, please, I'd like to, hear about your journey. Most people will say yes because they love to talk about themselves, right? And people then love you because you care to learn about them. So definitely don't forget that, right? Don't forget that people are a little bit egocentric, and just stroking their ego and hearing what they have to say will go a long way in helping you get jobs.
Oh, that was some great wisdom. Fantastic. Rodrigo, what do you have to tell us about some tips for getting that first job when you're about to graduate?
Yeah, I think, I'm a huge fan of internships. I think internships are phenomenal. I think the people trust you. People, you'll get a job when people trust you that you're able to do the job, right? And companies, particularly large companies, they have an open rec, they have a job, and they need to fill that job. And so your role as a candidate is to match yourself as closely as possible to that need that the company has. Kind of strip away the philosophy and all the rest of the stuff. This is just bare bones paying gig and not a paying gig. It's like they're gonna pay you if you're the best logical person to fulfill the requirement that they have. And so what I always tell undergraduate students is do the internships, do the philanthropy, do the leadership, show that you have hustle and you have ambition and an entrepreneurial mindset, and then map that to whatever the job requirement is, and make it as closely as align it as closely as you possibly can to ensure that you're the candidate for that gig, right? And of course, the passion and the interest in the organization goes without saying, but just at the bare minimum, there's a need, you can fill that need, you make it as connected as possible in those two arenas. I used to always ask in interviews early in my career is what is your ideal candidate for this job, right? And then I would mentally hear them speak, and then I would bring back to them how I'm that person that they just described they want to hire, right? And so I think that's the game, if you will, or the strategy in that particular space. And I would say earlier we talked a lot about brand and like IBM early in your career, phenomenal. Microsoft, Google, all that phenomenal, right? But if you do end up in a place where maybe the startup didn't go so well, or maybe you didn't stay very long at Google, and there's some whatever it is, right? There's an art and science to separating the organization or where you were to what you did in that particular role, right? And so it comes down to ultimately they're hiring a person. They're hiring a person that they're going to have some emotional connection with, some like-mindedness that you need to find a chemistry element to it. And so I think it's important to not just I was at HP or I was at IBM, but what did I do there, and how was my time spent there of value to the organization in X, Y, and Z. That's thinning that out and sort of cultivating that narrative is important.
Wow, so many great insights. I will say that there's one student I recognize in the audience who just got a job at PricewaterhouseCoopers after interning there. So that's living proof. I think we have lots of stories like that, but one of them is in the audience, which is wonderful and such good advice. I was thinking, Rodrigo, you took a marketing class from me when you were in grad school, and I was teaching at another school. And marketing is identifying the needs and wants of your target market and giving it to them. And what you talked about in the interview, find out what they want and give it to them. And to a large extent, that's what Gwen said as well. Find out, look at that job description. What do they say they're looking for? Well, if you can deliver that, that's great. But if you don't tell them, they don't know. It doesn't do you any good. I mean, you're not going to make things up. If they say we want an MBA and you don't have one, then don't go there. You don't want to be one of those people, like, some people in the Capitol Hill. But it's your job to find out what they want and make sure they know if you have those skills. And so that's really marketing yourself. And, I often tell my students the most important thing you're ever going to market is yourself. You want to know what you want, how you're going to get it, what do the people who can give it to you want, and how are you going to make sure they know you've got it to deliver. So thank you so much. These have been such great answers.
Michelle, I have one thing to add based on what you said, like market yourself, right? I know not everyone here is a design major. I don't even know if there's any design major. One thing that we look at in UX before we look at any resume or accept any resume is that we look for a portfolio link. And the reason why we look for a portfolio link is because we want to see achievements or work. So as you're talking about marketing yourself, it might be a good idea for some of you, maybe just explore if there are ways for you to show your achievements, show your work, show things that you have done before, pictures of the nonprofit site that you helped with, or places that you volunteered at the Habitat. So it gives people, the employers, a chance to know you a little bit more, because recruiters look at resumes for 3 seconds and they make the decision on whether or not they want to keep you or in the yes pile or no pile. But when it comes to a portfolio, sometimes they spend up to 3 minutes looking through your portfolio site. So 3 seconds, 3 minutes, you want to take that 3 minutes, you want them to look at you, you want them to consider you, and then make that decision of putting you in the yes or no pile.
Yeah. And I think that's such a brilliant point. They don't have a lot of time. I think students think that these people have time to read your resume carefully when you're one of 200 and they've just got one position. So make it easy for them to find the information that's going to make them want to keep you in the yes pile. So that's just a really great point. Thank you so much. All right. So we don't have a ton of time for Q&A, and I apologize for that. We've got 7 minutes. We've got some questions posted. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. But I see one that I think is probably worth sharing, since I have a bunch of panelists that I know worked very hard today and still came and are here on this panel for a whole 90 minutes. And so I think I'm going to ask this question because it's a passion question of mine, and hopefully someone wants to share their answer from our esteemed, wonderful panel. Okay. How do you manage the balance between your professional and personal life to ensure that your work doesn't adversely affect your overall well-being? So this is one of those work-life balance questions. How do you make sure that, because you're all super successful, right? You've been leaders in different industries. You've worked at different companies. Some of you are managing your own company. Some of you, I mean, you've had all sorts of huge responsibility, and yet you seem all happy and healthy. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you take care of your well-being as well as being a success as a leader? Anyone want to answer that? Oh dear.
It's a challenge. And I think, I travel a lot for work, and the glamour of that wears off very quickly. I think that it's, you do have to take time for yourself. You have to refresh. I've certainly not been exemplary in that arena throughout my career. No one's going to tell you to take time off. I mean, maybe some bosses are really great and some mentors are really great, but companies are not in the business necessarily of your well-being, right? I mean, that's the hard, honest truth. Some more progressive companies are, particularly on the coasts. But in general, they're built to get as much out of you as possible for the P&L, and thus that's the way it works. So I think you have to really block out and find those moments in time, and I've gotten a lot better at it. I've will block weekends out. I will find myself, no, I'm going to do this for the company. And then I go, wait a minute, can I maybe do this for me first and then do it for the company? And sort of, having my own narrative of like, a silly example is I want to go skiing this weekend. I can either leave at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and take all the calls I have to take here, or I can leave at 8 in the morning and take the calls on the road or at a Starbucks halfway up. And so in the past, I would have taken the calls here and left later and gotten much later. Today, I'm like, oh, screw that. I'm going and I'm doing this for me, and et cetera. Right. And I think that part of that comes with seniority as well. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. Part of that comes with, I've taken, I won't take any more red eyes, but I've taken a slew of red eyes in my life. I don't recommend them. I've flown on weekends. I've flown on Sundays. So I think, part of that comes with seniority and sort of being able to have the flexibility, whether it's your own business or start whatever it is, or a company. But I think and I think this newer generation coming in has a much better handle than certainly I did as a Gen Xer coming into the workplace. They're more apt to put boundaries and parameters around their life work balance, which I think is phenomenal and good for them. So I think it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, and I think it was said a little bit earlier. Don't expect the job to fulfill every aspect of your life, and I think that's really sound advice, right? I think that it's sound advice for in general, but I think particularly we end up some of us end up identifying very, very succinctly with, I'm a tech person, or I'm a marketer, or I'm a finance person, or I'm a whatever that is, right? And sometimes that can that over reliance on that identity can keep you from taking some breaks and finding other hobbies and other places to go. And I'll end with, it said, you should be interested in other people. And the best way to do that is to be interesting yourself. And to do
Yes.
that, you have to be able to have a variety of hobbies and a variety of experiences that bring, especially in today's, dynamic global planet, the more you're able to see outside of your own purview, which takes time and energy and intention, the more suited you're going to be to have conversations that are more in as you go through your career, at dinners, at parties, at cocktail receptions, at airport lounges, whatever it is, which is where you meet people that then can help you in your career. So I think it's all kind of intertwined.
Yeah, that's such a I'm going to let you answer, but I just have to say really quickly, I read a sign at some point, take care of your wellness or you'll be forced to take care of your illness. And so I think, if we don't take care of it, eventually it'll affect our ability to do our work. And now I'm sorry, I think that was Christine or Gwen. I can't remember who wanted to talk. I'll shut up now. Yeah.
I was just going to say just very briefly that you also get to set the parameters. And I think that one of the things that people don't think about when they start a new job is like, if you respond at 9 p.m. at night and on Saturdays, then people are going to expect that. So stop the inclination to do that. I actually do a lot of work over the weekends, but I schedule my messages to go out on Monday morning because I don't want to create the expectation that I'm going to be available all weekend, even though I am. But my point is that that's what you just really have to think about and do. And again, nothing, unless you're doing heart surgery, there's not anything that's usually that imminent that you need to be responsive to. And then also just let people know what your life obligations are, right? I mean, people will understand that. And if you draw a bright light and a line in the sand about that, and you're really productive at what you do, no one can really say anything, right? As long as you get what's done when it needs to be done, and you've communicated to your team your deliverables, and they know what to expect and when to expect it, that should be sufficient. But don't be afraid to say, I have a hobby and I do tennis every Tuesday, or I take care of my mom and like I have to be there for her, or whatever it might be. Or even make something up, right? Because that's just something I think that people don't do often enough. I had a situation where a friend of mine was ran the legal department of a former like tech company that was sold to Oracle. And one of the women she ran the legal department, and one of the women had to go out on maternity leave, and she felt so nervous about leaving. And then when she came back, she was really good at leaving every day at 5. And so one of the male employee was like, "Why does she get to leave at 5?" And my friend, without missing a beat, was like, "If you're as productive as she is in the same time in those same hours, you can leave at 5 too. Pick up a hobby and just go do something, but be productive, and you can leave at 5 too." And I think that's a lot of people really do believe that. And if you're doing that, that's enough. But you have to set your boundaries. If you don't set your boundaries, you will absolutely not have any flexibility, and you'll lose your work-life balance, because it's going back to what was said earlier to Rodrigo. Like, the company's goal is to get you to do the maximum amount of output for them that you can possibly do. They're not really that incented to make you have work-life balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much now in the news about burnout, and we want to avoid that. With that in mind, I don't want to be keeping my panel late, and we're already at 8:31. So I just want to close by saying, I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Thank you so much. What a great panel. I thought this would be fantastic, but I didn't think I would learn as much as I did, because I've been around. I've worked at small and large companies too, but I learned so much from every single member of this panel. And I want to thank the audience for staying for 90 minutes, because you've probably also had long, hard days. We will have a recording of this event. We will send it out to people who have attended, and we will make it available probably on YouTube as well. I can't say enough how great this panel is. I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but we promised 90 minutes. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you to my audience for coming and being engaged.